Hey, welcome back. Hope everybody got their fix of whatever it is they needed. I wanted to mention that there's a sign-up sheet for informal BOFs. We have a slot open from 4:30 to 6 this afternoon for people to run a sort of informal session of their own. If you need to sign up, if you want to do so, there's a sheet out by registration. If you're standing looking at the registration desk, it'll be to your right. So please go sign up so we can allocate that space. Thanks.
Okay, we're going to continue on with the second part of the panel. Mark Costers from ARIN is going to lead this section, Internet Operations and ARIN Policy. Is there convergence? Part 2. Mark?
All right, so script router, that's not right, but that's after mine. So, okay, so I'm glad to see that everybody's made it, and I'm hearing from the panel that this is going to be the more controversial part. So I hope you guys are kind of like you're like rejuvenated now and all ready to go. So I'm going to go through a little bit of the slides again in terms of whether the issues going on within ARIN that affect you within operations community, 4-byte ASNs, and there's a policy right now saying, hey, look, you have to give out 4-byte ASNs as default, but yet the community itself is not quite ready to support it universally across the board. So what do we do? WHOIS cleanup, the WHOIS data has been old and decrepit for years, and we're working on cleaning that up, and there's been a serious initiative underway to make that happen. Via policy, there's V6 policies, of which we're going to be talking about now, and relaxed transfer policies that we just talked about. So again, I'm sure you're fretting, and ARIN is here to help you. Actually, you're here to help ARIN because you're the ones who are making ARIN happen. It's not us as me as an ARIN employee or others that work for ARIN, but it's really you as members who make these policies happen. We just go ahead and enforce them. So this time we're going to talk about V6 policies and how it impacts operations, business, internet, you name it. So the panelists, again, it's the same panelists, so you get to hear them once more, and you can vote on who's the best, and put me as the worst, please. So here's go ahead and talk about V6 policies. We really don't have a lot of operational experience yet to back up policy in terms of what works and what doesn't. We do have that for V4. We've had years and years and years of this. And V6 traffic is like less than a fraction of 1% so far as a total value. But we definitely need to gain some experience in making sure that we have things do things right. And on the NANOG list, there's this recent discussion on assignment sizes. What's too big, what's too small, what's just right. And really, as ARIN staff, we have no idea. It's really up to you guys to actually tell us, hey, this really seems to make sense. Route filtering. What seems to make sense here? There's /48s that are being routed right now through the micro allocation policy for critical infrastructure. So if they're filtering on /32s that are given ISPs for their allocations, what about those critical allocations, and how are those actually taken care of? And there's sort of the question that came up a little bit earlier in terms of, does routing policy actually affect ARIN assignment and allocation policies? And where does that play a role? And it's a sort of uncomfortable sort of situation we're in, saying, well, we give out allocations, but we also want those allocations to be useful for you. But on the other hand, there's a whole idea of route filtering. Where does that play in effect? And finally, are the V6 policies that are there today, are they adversely affecting rollout? And are there things that could be done differently that could actually progress this in a much faster way? Because we do have this V4 issue coming up in a couple of years in terms of what's going to happen with V4 once we run out. So our speakers are going to be talking about this, and so I'm going to bring up the first one here. And I think, Igor, you're up first, right? Oh, you're up last. Okay, why don't you come up first? And I'll go ahead and make this order. I don't know why that happened, but that's the way it is. Okay.
So, IPv6 policy. Well, the good. If you're an established ISP, getting IPv6 space is really, really easy. It took us under 20 minutes. Really. Go ahead, fill out the form, you will get the space. That's great. The bad. Well, there's a single line in NRPM, or NPRM, or whatever that is, that you must announce all your routes as a single aggregate. And I firmly believe that that's actually hindering V6 deployment. Simply put, not everybody's willing to put all of their eggs inside a single /32 basket. Right now, Yahoo, for example, has 180 some odd different routes. If one of them gets hijacked, only one of them gets hijacked. With a single /32, if that 32 gets hijacked, all of Yahoo is down. Different reason is traffic engineering. If you can't do traffic engineering like we're used to doing with IPv4, to engineer traffic for some data centers differently than others, for some specific net blocks like inbound mail or crawl, different than others, then that's not a workable solution for us. Also, what happens if you do any cast across multiple clouds? Do you need to burn a entire IPv6 /32 for one IP address? That doesn't work. And of course, multiple discrete networks. What about multiple non-connected data centers or a bunch of different branch offices? A single /32 just doesn't cut it. But it's not, there is hope. 2009-5 is a policy proposal that's going to be voted on, hopefully, this ARIN meeting for IPv6 multiple discrete network allocation. That should address some of it. Also, I believe 2009-7 is up for discussion and will be voted on probably at a later meeting, which will actually proposes removal of the single aggregate requirement. That is a good thing. Like ARIN said before, please vote. It does make a difference, and it will help with V6 rollouts. So, thank you.
All right. So next is Dan. So he was originally intended for being first, but we'll go ahead and play with this a little bit. I love Windows. I'm getting better.
So I should probably qualify these slides before I get a little too deep in that I'm not saying V6 is going to be easy, that it's a done deal, that we don't need a ton of policy work and a large amount of efforts by everyone involved. But that is already going on. One of the reasons I made this slides is for those of you who are actually following some of the policy mailing lists and the discussions that are going on, there's a lot of, we're getting to the end, things are getting tight, and humans have a tendency to panic when things get scarce. So you hear a lot of discussions about we should ration this, or we should exclude a certain industry, or deny a certain set of devices, or we need to force V6 on everybody, or we need some kind of regulation. And the point that I was trying to make here is that I don't think we're there, and that's not necessarily needed. ARIN for many years has taken more of a position to facilitate growth than to force certain things on different organizations. V6 is happening despite everybody's current lack of visibility. But it's completely understandable when everyone has the typical complaints. ISP doesn't offer it, favorite website's not available, vendor doesn't support it. But everyone here in this room is very aware that it is a matter of priority. Every vendor, every business is prioritizing based on need. It takes a lot of resources, it takes a lot of manpower, and it takes a lot of planning to put all these pieces in place. I often look at this a slightly different way. V6 deployments are increasing, even in spite of the fact that most calculations show we still have 2 years left of V4 address space. That doesn't mean, oh, we're good and we can all go home, we don't need anything, because it's going to take several years to put all this in place. So it's not prudent to wait until the last minute, but it's also not very wise to sink everything we have into getting it out the door now. And it's also interesting that this current economic situation has almost bought everybody a little bit of time, because you see the depletion dates, like Jeff Houston's website, that the dates have consistently been sliding out a little bit. But the current lack of V6 visibility doesn't mean that everyone's ignoring the problem. Comcast, as an ISP, we're currently connecting other networks using V6, and the number continues to grow. We're running trials, and they're going to continue going forward and getting our edge customers connectivity. While it'd be helpful for other organizations to continually come forward to offer up what they're doing, that would help alleviate some of the concerns that due to the lack of visibility, because I think things like route counts and V6 bandwidth in this point in time aren't good metrics to use to gauge the state of V6 deployment. We are continually pushing this out, and if you look at the time frames that are needed to do this, if you're not currently working on it, then you really run the potential of getting left behind or stuck, because while in certain cases you can turn this up in a relatively short order, for some networks this takes a long time of planning. So from my perspective, if you're not already working on it, you're going to need to catch up if you want to keep up, because if you wait for V4 depletion to happen, it's already been too late. That's it.
So next is actually going to be Kevin.
So I'm going to talk to you about whether ARIN should be involved in IPv6 routing policy. Simply stated, when you talk to the ARIN folks about routing policy, they say, ARIN doesn't do routing policy. We assign addresses. Maybe they're routable, maybe they're not. That's not ARIN's business. But the reality is that the ARIN NPRM talks about the non-deaggregability of IPv6, calls for LIRs to aggregate to a, I said LIRs, got the wrong acronym in there, I apologize. But anyway, the ISPs are supposed to aggregate to a single prefix, a single /32, and as far as I'm concerned, that means ARIN is dictating my routing policy. Most significantly for me, I can't do traffic engineering. I can give you a very rock-solid example that I experienced just a few minutes ago. Our network does IPv6. All of my systems do IPv6. I connected to my home system with IPv6 and was running some applications, and they were running painfully slowly. Well, I discovered that if I ran over IPv4, I had a 60 millisecond round trip time to my home system. Over IPv6, I had a 170 millisecond round trip time because everything was bouncing off Washington, D.C. I'm in Berkeley, California. That's a long way from Washington, D.C. I wasn't even taking a real straight path between those locations, but we'll ignore those right now. The main thing is that I have one /32. I'm announcing that /32 at both coasts. It's up to whomever I peer with. Since I don't have any variables I can control to say which one to prefer, it's just a single /32. They pick whichever they feel like taking. Well, we're kind of in Michigan right now. That's kind of in the middle. So somebody flipped a coin someplace and said, we're sending the IPv6 to Washington. I don't know if that was a deliberate decision or just a fluke of the universe, but it means that I'm now switched over to IPv4. And I find that kind of embarrassing since I've been standing up here plugging IPv6 for several years, but with no traffic engineering, I didn't have any other way to do it. Now, this particular problem I thought was mainly an issue for those with a large geographic footprint. If you're a regional provider and all of your systems are in a single state, the latency change is fairly minimal. But it's been pointed out to me since that many enterprises face similar problems with needing to do traffic engineering, if nothing else for issues like load balancing. And if you're announcing a single prefix, well, that's kind of hard to do. Right now for IPv4, we have different pieces of our address space announced with different metrics on the two coasts. We thought many times about setting up a third section for the central U.S. Haven't quite done that yet. Probably won't do it for IPv4 anytime ever, but very likely we'll do it for IPv6 if we're allowed to do so. That allows traffic to remain localized. It minimizes latency. I should mention ESNet is somewhat unusual in that our main goal is not to move zillions of web page hits and a few fairly moderate-sized video feeds around the world. We're moving very large streams of data. We're talking about multiple gigabit per second single streams. And adding latency to those is simply disastrous. So we can't get away with doing that. We're going to have to find some other solution to that, and deaggregation looks like the best answer if we're going to be allowed to do it. And in a sense, we can do it anyway because we have a fairly small, closely knit community, and we can agree that Giant will take our /34s even if no commercial provider will. So that's the reason I'm slipping one slide behind here in what I'm saying. But right now, there is no way to localize traffic. There's no way to balance traffic flows. And what we do should not be ARIN's business. Every network is different. Every network has to make its own mechanisms for making their traffic flow reliably and effectively and economically. And that's something that ARIN doesn't deal with. And therefore, when ARIN starts setting policy in this, even if it's being said indirectly, it's going to have a negative impact on the growth of IPv6. That's simply not the right answer.
Thank you, Kevin. So next is going to be Tom Daly. Going to be speaking about this as well.
So I guess my opening comments are what they said, right? Because I think we've all been through this so far. You know, the 32's hijacked, it's flap dampened, you're taking a huge DDoS, all the control that you have in v4, if you're going to stay aggregated at the 32, it's just not there anymore. The other thing, you know, we all know that DAGs are being filtered in certain operator networks. So in our case, we're actually running v6 Anycast in a couple locations, but we rely on the 32 to at least bring traffic to certain provider networks and then rely on the provider to route those DAGs for us in their IGP, which is kind of an interesting engineering problem because now we're relying on our upstream to help control some of our routing policy. And I don't know about you guys in the room, but who wants your upstream handling major portions of your routing policy for you? Ideally, I'd like to be in full control of it myself. The other thing in the Anycast world is, you know, you're going to burn a whole 32 for a couple IP addresses. And in our case, that's for DNS. We just don't need that many IPs. It's pretty tough to burn a whole 32 for that. You might say, okay, fine, go for v6 microallocation. Well, you know, critical internet infrastructure, which is approved for the microallocs, is limited to CCTLD, GTLD, root server installations. I have commercial DNS customers. They're not critical internet infrastructure. This policy actually limits my ability to run our business. Something else that diving back into kind of the v4 world as a result of v6 policy is NERPRM 4.10, which basically says that upon assignment of the last /8 in v4 from IANA to a regional internet registry, ARIN will actually take a /10 and put that aside as a block that they can use to make /28 to /24 allocations for transitory infrastructure. And so that might be 6-to-4 gateways, it might be some DNS. But the interesting thing there is that that policy, when it got introduced, it allows allocation down to the /28. So in the worst case, you know, if all of those 28s out of the /10 get allocated, we're talking about 256,000 new routes in the V4 routing table. So we just, that policy right there doubles the size of the routing table. In the best case, assuming they all get allocated as /24s, that's 16,000 new routes. So this V6 policy is not just having impact on V6 operations, it's having limitations on V4. And, in most modern routing hardware, I think I'm seeing 512,000 routes in the FIB, maybe a little bit more. We're getting pretty close at that point in the worst case scenario under 410. So I think everybody should pull up the NERPERM and take a look at 4.10 because it's a interesting nuance in that policy. And then I think, the other one, going back to the V6 world, the policy is not exactly friendly to implementing BCP 16, which is the whole, DNS is on separate LAN segments, blah, 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 blah. We've been doing this for years. It's just been tough as a provider, and it's caused us to kind of have to create our own path for a way to make V6 DNS work in an Anycast environment.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Okay, and for our last speaker, it's going to be ARIN. And hopefully you guys are coming up with some really good questions or things that you'd like to discuss as we go through this as well.
Okay, so we all obviously didn't talk before we wrote these decks, and we all wrote the same thing down. So I'm going to take this conversation and change a little bit. The real issue here is ARIN versus NANOG, right? Or policy versus operation. Why isn't there some kind of common consensus among us to create the best practice for us as operators? Inside of the ARIN meetings, we have people represented from all of the different portions of the community, and everybody's got different opinions. It's particularly tough around V6, right? Some people want an internet that's exactly like the V4 internet with V6. I've even heard requests for things like NAT function in V6 and 1918-like space for V6, which is pretty scary. Some people want to redesign it so it's sort of like the internet diagram that was up earlier with the aggregated tier ones and customers down and so on. So you have clean aggregated ISP to customer hierarchy and somehow, magically make V6 secure. I don't know. And some want us to prevent making the same mistakes we've made with V4. So they're redesigning the internet architecture, giving these opinions in public meetings. And the way ARIN works is by community consensus within ARIN to pass a policy. So if you're not in there contributing to these votes, if you're not in there giving your opinions and being part of community consensus, then you're not being heard. And that means even if there's only one person in the room that's right and 300 in the room that are wrong, the 300 in the room that are wrong are going to get the policy passed. This is a big issue. So the real issue is why versus, why not and? Why aren't we together? Why do we have two separate meetings with very minimal overlap? So I have a slide that basically says the same thing as you just heard, except for I'll just give a different perspective on this. The single announcements breaks multi-homing. Yeah, well, who cares? The policy does break multi-homing, but look at the routing table. We're multi-homing. Today, you're supposed to have a single 32 to a single ASN. You're not supposed to be able to assign space out of that 32 and then announce it to another AS. Now, this is kind of weird because some operators completely ignore this. Will take your 48, announce it, give you multi-homing, no problem, fixed. Others in this room follow the policy. They'll filter, they'll say, hell no, we're not doing it. This is ARIN policy. I don't know why this exists today, but we do this. We're acting in different ways as a community, and it's very strange, and it's breaking things. We are lying to ARIN. We are lying to our registries. We're being forced to do things because of policies that we've created or haven't created, haven't participated in, that will force us to do things like lie to get new space to meet HD ratios, which we can't possibly do. There's no support for TV. Ha! Look at the routing table. It's full of traffic engineering prefixes. I think there are about 2,100 prefixes in the table, and I'm pretty sure over half of them are for TE and multi-homing. Completely violates policy, but this is what we're doing. Why can't we write a document that makes sense, put this together in either some kind of best practice documents or policies that match, get together and actually come to a common decision that makes sense? Well, the only other note that wasn't mentioned is that obtaining space is easy. Well, there's one little odd thing in the V6 space policy that says you're required to be a known ISP, which is pretty strange. I actually ran into this personally where I was trying to get V6 space only, and I had to justify a need for V4 space and an ASN before I could even acquire V6 space because I wasn't a known entity. I think there's a policy right now on the table to make this go away, but just another odd anomaly. Anyway, the short of this is get involved and create some convergence, because right now they are two very disparate entities and they're doing different things. And as you can see, this is a problem in implementation. It's going to be a headache as we continue to go forward if you don't make a change.
So either I need to get taller or Aaron needs to get shorter. So, okay, now's the time for questions. So come up to the mic. We have 5 minutes here. And I see Kathy's up at the mic right now. Go ahead, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy Aronson. I'm on the ARIN Advisory Council. I'd like to say what Aaron said. We really need you guys to participate, but it also occurred to me that this is a very, very old policy. The V6 policy was written like when Kim Hubbard ran ARIN. So it's a really old policy. We had a lot of ideas then. Obviously, it doesn't meet your needs. So, and there is a policy proposal written by Aaron's wife to change the policy. But we do need people who do routing, who do traffic engineering, and all that sort of stuff to actually stay at the and participate in the ARIN meeting. And I'd really like to encourage you to do that. Thanks.
So before Owen gets down there, I just want to mention one thing. Again, on Tuesday night, there's going to be a session from 6 to 7 that's going to be talking about, essentially it gives you some time to actually formulate, to read over the policies that exist. And if there's issues that need to be brought up, that'd be a good time to actually start voicing those. And if you have the opportunity to stay for the rest of the week, going to the ARIN meetings, that would be useful. So go ahead, Owen.
Owen DeLong, Hurricane Electric, and the ARIN Advisory Council. Having policy at the ARIN level reflect routing is, in my opinion, a pretty bad place to do the control of routing policy. And I think almost everybody in this room, if they thinks it through, will agree. But there's a lot of talk about trying to make ARIN policies the place where we control the growth in the routing tables. And I think the example that was put up there of this breakage caused by the must announce a single 32 is a good example of why that's a bad idea. And I would encourage the operator community to get more involved in ARIN and solve these problems.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the message from just about all the panelists is that, I'll borrow Kevin's phrase, ARIN claims not to set routing policy. Perhaps it should actually stick to that claim and not write it in. So please vote for that to be removed.
Also, like to note that part of the reason these operational guidance or guidelines are being put in ARIN policy is today as an operator community, we don't have a place to document best practices in operations. We exchange presentations at NANOG, we have conversations on various IRC channels, we talk to each other and figure out best practices, but there is no document repository that says this is appropriate operator policy, generally speaking, and that's problematic.
I'll comment on that. I mean, the organization I'm with is a very new organization with relative to a lot of the panelists here. And there's a lot of new blood in our organization who have not been around routing and BGP and allocation for a very long time. And a lot of us just want to know why is a 24 the boundary? Now, we understand it's related to classful routing, but in V6, why is it a 32 or why is it a 48? Why did these decisions come up in the first place? So as Aaron's saying, there is no central repository. And for somebody who's just getting started, maybe I'm going to start announcing, 56s to the world and hope they go. And then when they don't work, I got to go ask, on some mailing list and get berated. So it would be nice if there was an operational repository for this information.
So we're going to close the mic off because we're at the end of the session, but we're going to steal a little bit more time so these questions can be aired. So after Marla. So, okay, so I think you're up first, Kathy.
Hi, it's me again. The reason that there's routing policy in ARIN policies, even though ARIN doesn't do routing policy, is because when this policy was written, everyone on the ARIN AC did routing and was concerned about routing table bloat, because I was on the AC then. It was maybe 11 years ago. And we were trying to bring operator information into the policy, and since then we're trying to remove it because we don't do routing policy. But we were trying to do the right thing when this policy was written. So
So Elaine, I think you're next.
Alain Durand speaking for myself. Someone think that this notion that routing policy and addressing policy has to be very different is plain wrong. This is one and the same thing, especially if we are going with transfers, if we're going to see a lot of pressure for de-aggregation. Somebody in the panel was worried about what used to be policy 2008-5 for the last /8 where we have micro-allocate up to /28. But those things are going to come up in the future. When will we be such a premium on getting V4 space, smaller and smaller blocks are going to be announced, we like it or not. And I think that we should really tie those addressing policies and those routing policies together. It doesn't mean that ARIN has to do the routing policy for me. It doesn't mean that I should do whatever I want regardless of what ARIN says. It means that we should talk as just one body.
If I could comment on just that for a minute. So when you break the /24 boundaries and you go to /28, there's engineering implications that go across the board, not only for routing, but also for DNS. So we start, if we're going to prepare for this and actually do it, then there's a lot of manpower that actually has to be expended beyond it.
Well, if there's a lot of manpower that needs to be expended, I suggest that we start now, because this is going to be the reality.
Understood. So, okay, Lee, you're up next.
Lee Howard, Time Warner Cable, also ARIN Board of Trustees, just for affiliation. So in that vein, I want to thank ARIN for volunteering to write a best current practices document for us. That was well volunteered. Good job. I also want to resist a little bit the exhortations that we hear that if ARIN says that they don't do routing policy, then they should not do that. We will do the words that you send us and gets discussed by the community. So it is incumbent on people who don't like current ARIN policies to send better words so that we can discuss those words. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Okay. Is that Jason back there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jason Schiller of Verizon UUNet. There was a question, historically, why have we routed /24s pretty much across the board ubiquitously? The answer is because we created a swamp. ARIN started giving out /24s to end sites out of known block, and that space got routed. Eventually that led to the de facto filtering of /24 amongst all the ISPs. There were a few holdouts for a long time. I think more or less now all ISPs accept up to and including /24. We are about to do the exact same thing in IPv6, which is to make a de facto routing policy of accepting up to 48, or perhaps even more specific than 48. And the way I theorize that is if people think that deaggregation is an acceptable solution to provider independence and to multi-homing, then we'll get PI 48s in the table. Then the PA holders are going to say, well, I would like to multi-home also. so we'll get PA 48s in the table. And then when we get a significant amount of V6 traffic, people will say, well, we really need the same traffic engineering capabilities that we have in V4. On average, in V4, NAS announces about 9 prefixes. So we're going to need to divide that up into, /52s, and everyone will have to listen to those. And then eventually we may whittle it down to /56 because that's what you're giving small office home users. And in V4, you give them a 24 and they can multi-home and get 1 slot. So if we're giving them 56s, they should be able to multi-home and get 1 slot. The concern with that approach is the routing table will get very big. Will it get very big tomorrow? No. Because, 3% of the ASs in the V4 table are running V6 today? We're very, very early on in the early adoption curve. But that curve is expected to be S-shaped, and I expect it to ramp up fairly quickly. In the next year, the next 2 years, before depletion occurs, at depletion, a year after depletion, I don't know. But at some point in the foreseeable future, there will be a significant number of the V4 ASs that are running V6. And when that happens, the routing table will be very big. And what I'm urging people to do is to look at the routers they have, look at the capabilities of the fib of the routers they currently have, look at the biggest router you can buy today and what those capabilities are, and try and predict out how big the routing table will be in your current refresh cycle. My refresh cycle is about 5 years, plus 6 months worth of certification, plus 1.5 years to forklift upgrade my entire network. So I'm looking 7 years out. 7 years out, the routing table looks like it could be very big if widespread V6 adoption occurs, and we let all these more specifics into the routing table. The other thing I urge people to do is to not be naive about it. Do not let these prefixes into the routing table now, saying that there's only 2,000 prefixes and we don't care and we'll deal with the problem when it happens. Because as we saw in V4, we never had a chance to drain the swamp. We'll never get a chance to do it in V6. And if you're hoping for an architectural solution to bail you out, as soon as we route more specifics ubiquitously, there'll be no reason to pursue an architectural solution. And if one does appear, why would anyone implement it when it's different than what they're currently doing and probably more complicated and maybe not even have the same capabilities?
Anyone have any comments? Okay, so, hey, Marla?
Actually, Mark.
Oh, go ahead, Igor.
I'd like to respond to that, if I may. Perhaps the answer to some of that is that to some big ISPs, your refresh cycle is 7 years. It's the cost of doing business, and perhaps it should be shrunk down. I won't argue the fact that, yes, it would be great to have an architectural solution to this problem. However, one does not exist right now. We have enough challenges deploying V6 already. Let's not make ARIN yet another one of those hindrances in there.
So just to respond to that, Igor, we're looking at the business case right now. We're looking at what it costs in terms of lost customers if we don't route the space, and what it costs to upgrade the network if we do route the space, and crunching the numbers and trying to see if the business case makes sense.
So, and you're speaking of Verizon, correct?
Yes, Verizon.
Right. Okay.
And I think Jason just stated the bottom line. Everybody out there is a business provider with a few odd exceptions like me. But most of you are out there as business providers. You will look at the business case. You will decide, can we afford to route 500,000/56s? And if you decide we can't route 500,000/56s, you're going to start telling folks that we're not going to accept your /56s. We're going to accept your whatever is appropriate. Those policies are going to change. They're going to flex. They're going to adjust as equipment adjusts. But it's going to be driven by the business case, not by what ARIN does, and frankly, not by what NANOG does. If in fact NANOG actually does something. We're not really that type of organization. But ARIN's work also is not going to be what decides this. It's going to be the business case. If you lose money, I don't think you're going to do it, at least not for very long.
Marla, you're up.
Marla Azinger, I work for Frontier Communications. Another bottom line, operators are who control it. What we do is what will happen. And yeah, it's fantastic when policy coincides with what we do. So the other bottom line, which I've been asking for years, since I'm kind of new to this even compared to several of you that are around here, one of the charters needs to read that they're going to write routing policy. NANOG's charter does not write routing policy. ARIN's charter does not write routing policy. So either you have choice A, adjust NANOG, B, adjust ARIN, or C, create yet another organization. I don't think we all want another conference to have to go to. We have enough as it is. So really our choices are who's going to do it. And I can never get an answer to who's going to do it. So I'm asking you, the community that's here, who do you want to adjust the charter and write into it that there's actually going to be routing policy written?
Marla, I think you left another choice out there.
Okay, go for it.
The choice out there is that nobody writes the routing policy and that everybody writes their own. Because my routers, my policy.
Right, and that's kind of what the main point is about operators. What they do is what's going to happen. But we're hearing a lot of people saying they'd like to at least have one centralized policy that people should do their best to follow.
There are best practices, but again, my routers, my policies.
I get it.
So folks, we're running way over the time limit here. And Raz, if you wouldn't mind getting your panel up here on the side. Guys, if you wouldn't mind, we're going to do some swap out. While Randy gives his question at the microphone, we're going to do a little transition up front.
How did we come up with the /19? Which organization put that in policy? ARIN? Remember, it used to be 19 for all the registries, and then it started creeping 20, 21, 22. Okay? There was no organization that did it. A bunch of operators and registry people, et cetera, sat together in, actually we're standing, I think, in IETF Danvers, and we looked each other in the eye and we said, Sean's routers can't live without with anything longer than the /19. And we all said, okay, we'll let Sean live a couple years. And I don't know if you can do that kind of cabal today, but as Igor says, my routers.
And a final note, and I'm responding to Randy because I was on the panel. At some point, the limitations of silicon kick in as well, and that's a problem too.
Shocking. While Raz is getting... Thank you, everybody, for participating on the last panel. We appreciate that. And I'm certain that many folks in this room will welcome continued hallway discussion.